Welcome to this MGAA briefing. I'd like to welcome Paul Handy of Crawford. Paul has the title of Head of Global Technical Services Europe and Operational Head of Cyber Risks. Paul's got 22 years experience in the insurance and loss adjusting arena, and he's dual qualified, Chartered Insurance Practitioner and Chartered Loss Adjuster, and a committee member at both the CII and the Chartered Institute of Loss Adjusters. Paul also has an MBA. And with that introduction, I'll hand over to Paul.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Is the mic working? Brilliant. Okay. So, should introduce my colleague, Doug Mower, quickly. Doug works very closely with me in managing our cyber response. A fountain of knowledge as far as what we do and how we do it, and is available for questions afterwards. So, why have I put up this slide? Well, I'm not going to talk about me. You've heard enough about me already. Other than to say that I am a loss adjuster. And with that, the approach that I'm going to adopt to this subject may be slightly different from what you've heard previously. Cyber risks represent a huge opportunity for the insurance community, not only meeting our clients' risk transfer and advisory needs, but also providing post-breach, post-event or post-breach response, and ultimately claims management services. Specialist expertise and related services play a key role across this spectrum. But who do you call and when? Every event is different and requires an immediate tailored response, often in a stressed or brand-threatening environment. There may be numerous triggers, which occur concurrently or with separate work streams, priorities, operational impact, or business risk. All of these need managing from a strategic, control, and communication standpoint, often within or sitting alongside an insurance environment. So let me ask you a question. Do you get better results when you employ a specialist with a defined and specific brief built around their core skill set, or when you let them roam across areas that perhaps do not necessarily sit comfortably with their qualifications or experience? In the same way, would you use me to forensically interrogate an IT platform or provide legal advice on a multi-jurisdictional regulatory matter? Qualified expertise is vital, but the application should be carefully chosen, managed and controlled without commercial or self-fulfilling bias, thereby providing a cohesive solution that effectively addresses the specific business need. So, what I'd like to talk to you about today is aimed at helping you understand the threat and operational risk that a data breach represents to your or your client's business. And a few questions. And when I say you, I mean from a wider insurance perspective. Obviously, it relates to you and your clients. And have you developed and tested a credible incident response plan? These are questions you might ask your clients. Do you understand the potential complexity of an incident and who the key stakeholders are? And do you embrace or pay lip service to your insurance partners? This is something that we see more and more, or a question we ask more and more when we read about some of the events that are in the press. So the takeaway is understanding the complexities of how to manage a cyber breach, consider the benefits of pre-event planning, and how to manage your response to ensure a breach remains, as I say, just an event, and importantly, not a headline. So I'm going to go through that now. It's probably best to leave most questions till the end. Obviously, I've said we've got Doug here. But if there's something that I'm talking about that you don't understand or want more clarity around, then please just shout out. So, firstly, and for those of you that not come across us previously, a quick introduction to Crawford. Crawford is the world's largest independent provider of claims management solutions to the risk management and insurance industry, as well as self-insured entities. On the slide, you'll see a few key statistics about the business. including our latest results, which I've just put on there, which came out last week. So looking at about 1.2 billion across our core business areas, which are claims services, business process outsourcing, and consulting. So what do we know? Well, here are some facts and figures from 2015, but let me give you some findings from the same PwC survey of 2016. 91% of businesses follow a risk-based cyber security framework. 69% use cloud-based cyber security services. 59% leverage big data to improve cyber security. 65% collaborate with others to improve cyber security. And 54% now have a CISO in charge of their information security program. So continuing on this theme, how are businesses responding to the rise in cyber risk? Well, in 2015, 38% more security incidents were detected than in 2014, and the theft of hard intellectual property increased to 56% in 2015, but financial losses decreased 5% from 2014 to 15. So I would suggest, therefore, that these incidents are beginning to be managed more effectively than they were in the past. Whilst employees remain the most cited source of compromise, incidents attributed to business partners climbed to 22% in the past year. I'll sort of circle back on that a bit later. So this is a typical attack map taken from Mandiant's, who are an IT forensic company's 2015 threat report. So just see how an attacker basically moves laterally across a corporate's IT platform, or estate, as it's often referred to. What's interesting is that this form of attack is not always evident on day one. So it's often hidden behind a smokescreen or a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack. Frequently, when you're looking at the press, you hear about these type of events, which essentially, for those that don't know, impact on the insured's IT system, slow it down, prevent it working. So often what happens is you have an attack such as that, which basically takes resources in one direction, takes focus in one direction, but actually the actual attack is going ahead behind the scenes somewhere else. That's where they're accessing the data. So you've just got to be always aware of that. But, as I said, they're often hidden behind a smokescreen or other malicious activity. So the other thing to note is indeed the average attack or threat group are often present on the insured's network for up to 8 months before detection. So this is something that, this is a stated fact. It's not made up. Frequently you have attackers who probe an organisation's IT security. They investigate, they find weaknesses, they may get in. By getting in, they obviously cause the IT team to tackle that and solve the problem, improve their firewalls, and then they just sit dormant for 8 months, waiting until things have gone quiet, and then they obviously start exfiltrating data or doing some other malicious activity therefrom. So be very conscious of that, and also be conscious when you're dealing with cyber events that actually you may think it's over, and you may think it's all gone quiet, but it perhaps hasn't. And therefore it's very important, this again comes back to the need to involve specialists who can provide some sort of guarantee that that system is clean before you guys start closing your files. So again, sort of following on. So how are these attacks being detected? Well, only 31 of these breaches are discovered internally, and by far the majority come from some external source, such as media, extortion, or third-party customer, supplier, or business partner. So you very rarely, or no, very rarely is the wrong term, but frequently you find out about them because of some sort of external activity. Or, again, I'll comment on this later, something happening at a supplier's site or a service provider's site. Very rarely is it an internal discovery on its own. A recent survey indicated that 4 in 10 businesses, and there were 500 businesses that were questioned during this survey, had suffered a material or significantly disruptive loss relating to a data breach or security vulnerability in the last 24 months. This was an American survey, and the value of these attacks the average value of these attacks was set at $1.1 million. So let's talk about the 3 basic elements of cyber coverage as we see them. You've got 3 circles on the board. The first one is, as you look at it, is loss prevention, which we often may refer to as risk management, pre-risk work, information security type requirements. The second one is loss or risk transfer, which sits in our environment. It's the insurance world that we exist in. And the third one there is post-breach response. And I was talking to somebody earlier. That actually often is really what our clients are looking for, as well as the risk transfer, which will enable them to recover their losses. They're actually more interested in what we can do to support and protect that business. If you think of it this way, if you have a major incident and you sit back and you say, "Oh, I'm all right, I've got this insured," these are brand-threatening losses, and there won't be a business if you just sit back. It doesn't matter how much money you get back from insurers; it just will not exist. So they are more interested, or often very interested, in looking at that post-breach response. How can we protect and help the insured mitigate their brand-threatening type losses? And the diagram shows these segments as overlapping, although they can easily be separated to create clear definition or to avoid perceived conflict that insurers and others may potentially see. So the role of the loss adjuster is generally positioned as indicated, sitting within the loss transfer and post-breach response space. Again, providing a joined-up and comprehensive solution, or intentionally differentiated and independent. And we provide both service models, which work equally well and often reflect our principals' chosen operating models, specific needs, or cultural practices. The loss adjuster's role is, I believe, pivotal in supporting the insured in protecting their business's brand, as I've alluded to, managing a crisis, mitigating the risk, instructing and managing experts, ensuring effective communication, and ultimately achieving a successful resolution of any potential claim in line with chosen risk transfer or insurance arrangements. I'm going to comment on this later, but we also pull on that experience and expertise to provide BCP, or business continuity planning, and scenario planning consultancy, which often sits alongside our breach response and loss adjusting relationships. This perhaps slightly overlaps into the loss prevention space, but actually builds trust, operational knowledge, and structure to our response, helping us hit the road running on notification of a breach, of an incident or breach, the benefits of which cannot be overstressed when dealing with a cyber-related event. Again, I'm going to come back to this and I may repeat myself, but if you can imagine, one of the things that we always do when we're dealing with major clients is we try and have a relationship in place to start with. We know the key stakeholders. We understand how that business works. But your typical property or liability loss, you've got space to breathe. You can, to a degree, form some of those relationships whilst investigating the circumstances, arranging meetings to take place a little bit later. Cyber risk, you don't have that. You don't have that freedom. The response which is required is immediate, And one thing you do not want to be doing is basically playing catch up or a learning game whilst you're trying to manage that incident. I may repeat myself later about that, but it is extremely important. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what a typical cyber risk policy covers. And I think you will have probably be aware of the different coverages that exist in the market. Cyber's been around for some time, often as bolt-ons to existing policies, whether those are E&O, D&O, liability type covers. And there's a question mark as we move forward as to how cyber will develop in the market. Will it develop in the form of a standalone product and providing comprehensive insurance policies, providing the coverage along the lines of what I've outlined here, or will it remain as a bolt-on to existing or established lines of business, importing the underwriting expertise in relation to the cyber risk that attaches to that particular line? I think there's some debate going on currently as to how that will look. My own personal feeling is there is space for both. Particularly, I think if you look at the SME market, where the insured is potentially looking for some more security around cyber, and really is just keen to make sure that it is all covered and there's no gaps. Whereas the more intelligent buyer, if you like, that's a wrong term, would actually pick specific coverages to suit that business. But let's just talk about the coverages that do exist. So, firstly, we have cross-class first-party and third-party risk. Another nuance of cyber. It's not just one; it covers across the various disciplines. And I'm sure you will have been aware that within your organisations, different teams are dealing with cyber, and you can probably go to one of your neighbouring companies and ask the same question. You may find that there's a different team dealing with it. But it includes the privacy, liability and asset replacement and business income loss. Let's expand on that. We talk about data breach. That is that privacy liability element. So as an insured, you have, if you hold data belonging to an individual, then that is, you are responsible for the security of that data. And if that data is then accessed or breached, you are de facto negligent in the way that you have managed that data and potentially have a liability for that loss. So that is where that element of cover comes into play. And the regulation around data privacy is changing. Again, you'll probably be aware of the requirements currently, but they are going to become more stringent. The fines are going to become greater and quite significant amounts. So there's quite a focus on privacy liability, and often that is what if you're talking about cyber, frequently that's what people refer to. Asset replacement falls into the category of if you have a specific piece of equipment which is affected by a cyber-related attack, then potentially that equipment is covered. Affected is interesting, and damage. How do you classify damage within a cyber event? Somebody hacking into your system. Does that mean that your system is damaged? What is the damage? Difficult, very difficult. So often the word affected is put in there, or words to that effect, which means that if there's an element of reprogramming required in order to return that asset back to a fully operational state, then essentially you have some element of cover there. And the third bit there I put in is business income losses. Business income is your first-party business loss, which is easy to describe really. If you've got a piece of kit, say for example, you are a web-based or a company that relies upon a web-based mechanism in order to trade, and your systems are taken down for a week, then you can clearly attribute potentially that impact on the business. So it's a relatively straightforward, tangible type of loss and attributable BI. The other element of BI coverage is harder. So if you have a data breach, then potentially there's some very negative publicity that can come from that. If you think of TalkTalk and the publicity that came with that TalkTalk event, by far the greatest impact on that business was in relation to their loss of sales, stroke reputation, stroke brand, rather than the actual impact on the business itself from the data breach. So you then are looking at it forensically, looking at that loss and trying to determine what is the value of that loss on the business. So we utilise traditional forensic accounting tools, looking at standard turnover, etc., in order to measure that. But that tends to have a longer tail. And the other element is dependent business insurance, business income losses, whereby essentially you have an incident at a service provider's site that impacts on your business. So again, I talked about it earlier about how these claims come about. But if you can imagine, a lot of businesses outsource their IT or various elements of their IT. They don't have control on that. There is an incident that affects that service provider's site, and then that has a definite impact on your business. So it extends into that area as well, or even another supplier's premises. So specific extensions around this, based around the privacy breach costs, such as IT forensics or extortion. So these are defined extensions to the coverage that exists, and would cover, when I say IT forensics, we're talking about investigations into, first and foremost, containment. Okay, you have an event, what have you got to do to contain it? Then you're looking into cause and extent, what's happened and how big is it? And finally, we're looking at resolution, essentially. So what needs to be done in order to sort that problem out and prevent it happening again. That's the sort of IT forensic space. And we've all heard of extortion claims that often sit behind these. You have a privacy breach, and then the attacker looks to extort money from you in relation to releasing that data or not doing anything further with it. So extortion claims and the management of the extortion claim, and that's quite important. It is not just about how much money you've paid over. In actual fact, we advocate, and a lot of the clients that we deal with, that you shouldn't pay extortion claims. If you pay an extortion claim, you get put on a suckers list, and then you get an email 2 minutes later saying, thanks for that, could we have a bit more, please? So any extortion payment needs to be carefully looked at, and I would advocate that should be on the back of professional advice as to whether you pay it or not. So we can bring in experts, and I'll comment on this later. We can bring experts that can obviously help a business manage that type of extortion attack, and then provide advice around whether or not it is beneficial to pay the extortion monies, either by way of entrapment or time, etc. And that's where the policy responds. It's not just somebody sending a check. Payments and fines. There is, on the back of the regulation that we're talking about, there are potential fines which are recoverable, and the policy sits in place to potentially cover those fines, even to extending to your sort of credit card type payments, to your more regulatory type losses or fines that you may have in place, or you may be set against the business. And then finally, cyber terrorism. So again, cyber terrorism, if you like, is specifically excluded and then potentially brought back through a cyber coverage, and I think is an interesting area as we move forward. And at the moment, a A lot of the cyber claims that we are dealing with are very much focused around privacy breach. They're looking at data, but potentially there is a risk that operational systems will start to be attacked, either from a malicious or from a terrorism perspective. And you can imagine, can't you, that if somebody got into the telephone networks in London and affected those, or the traffic lights, or the electricity network in the UK, you could create absolute havoc. So that's the sort of breadth of coverage that exists. So looking at the loss pyramid. So I think we can safely say that any claim is likely to be complex in nature, calling on a broad and experienced skill set. As such, we very much position cyber risk at the top of our loss adjusting pyramid, engaging our most experienced, large and complex loss adjusters. This approach works extremely well when dealing with your larger global corporate type risk or loss. But what about the SME space? A definite challenge, and the underlying complexity of risk remains, but the need and call upon our combined expertise is arguably greater, but economics play a much greater role. This is a separate discussion. I'm not going to necessarily focus on it today. Safe to say that we've recognised this need and built a more localised and process-driven model, which we believe ticks all of the necessary economic boxes, as well as having access to the broad range of expertise and skill sets required to effectively deliver a comprehensive solution. So, as I said earlier, the events or claims that we are dealing with are often brand threatening, but do we really appreciate complexity? What is the difference between your large cyber event such as TalkTalk and the Christchurch earthquake pictured below? Well, they're both significant events, making international headline news, affecting many people. Christchurch had a population of circa 200,000, somewhat less than the 4 million initially notified after the TalkTalk breach, and very close to the ultimately established number of people who had actually had their personal data accessed or stolen. So under no circumstances do I want to belittle the human and personal tragedy suffered by the residents of Christchurch. I was there and certainly witnessed it firsthand. But the complexity of the claims that we are dealing with are absolutely on a parallel to the type of losses we're beginning to see from our work in the cyber risks arena. One marked difference is that on receipt of your instruction for the typical property or physical damage claim, and again I've touched on this previously, we deal with any pressing issues and make an appointment with the insured once the fire is out, or in this instance the dust is settled. But you don't have that luxury with cyber. The response needs are immediate. An example of that is that I became aware of the TalkTalk claim at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But by 10 o'clock, it was headline television news, with Dido Harding making statements to the press in what have now become a highly critiqued attempt to protect both brand and reputation. All of this with little thought as to the insurance response or coverage that may or may not have been in place at the time. So I tend to use this slide to sort of show the multiple work streams or activities which we need to manage when dealing with a major loss event. So if I just talk through this for you from quite a high level. If we walk through from anti-clockwise from the top right. Top right, we're thinking about causation, coverage, subrogation, communication between all the stakeholders, getting that messaging right, setting expectations, and reserve through to the individual investigation and management of the various heads of claim, to include the appointment of experts. So if you walk from top middle, then you're looking, in this instance, it's a property damage claim, so you're looking through the buildings, and then you're moving into the machinery, and then you're moving into the stock, and you're moving into the business interruption elements of it. But all of these are happening at the same time, and all need successfully or need strategically managing through to the successful resolution of the claim. Cyber is no different, but we need to bolt on the role of the crisis manager, back to the need to hold the hand of the insured from the outset and provide the immediate response needed to protect not only brand but reputation, but also the interests of insurers, which at the early stage of the claim is about providing guidance and comfort around decision making, whilst managing expectations and ensuring effective communication between all of the stakeholders. We provide specific training to our staff to ensure that they can effectively take on this role, which we refer to as the incident manager. But in order to effectively manage a claim of this nature, we need experts who we can call upon to provide the specific advice to support the insured and or validate the findings or decisions that are necessary. It's quite important. Not always are we looking when we're dealing with large organisations. Are we able to import teams to lead and run that claim? Often we don't get involved day one. We're not able to get involved day one, and we have to come in at a later stage. So you need to be flexible. But you'll recognise that our contracted networks covers or can be applied to each of the different cyber-related risks and potential coverages that exist in the market, from IT forensics, legal, identity protection to PR. Each of these companies and specialisms have a vital role to play, but not always. And who do you deploy and when? Which person or organisation is best suited to the nature of the event which you are faced with? Do they dovetail with existing corporate arrangements or take a lead in managing that specific need? Yes, protecting privilege is important, but that is not necessarily the case, and certainly doesn't mean control of claim. But at the same time, one of the things that can do is that we need to make sure that it does not create delay or import conflicting priorities. I often refer to this as conducting the orchestra, without which things can often get out of sync or become unnecessarily messy or confused. So as I have alluded to earlier, there is a heightened focus on the first 48 hours during a cyber event, which incidentally is purposely referred to as an event and not a claim. We do not always know that these events are going to lead to a claim. And actually, frequently, we deal with these incidents and manage the response, and a claim does not materialise, or it is dealt with within deductibles. But during that first 5-hour period, early discussions enable the complexity of the situation to be understood and the core response to be agreed, involving specialists to support as necessary, containment and investigation, as I mentioned earlier. Often at this stage we're considering IT forensics, legal and public relations. By the 48-hour mark or thereabouts, you want to have a solution plan in place which clearly identifies and manages the risk, which will ultimately bring the business back to business as usual and support any subsequent claim that might ensue. So what does good look like? Well, for a major event, we would advocate the benefits of a complete end-to-end solution that you can rely on with the push of a button. This extends to service specialist providers who can provide a range of services, are considered best in class, and in our model have completed a comprehensive due diligence. A reliable ethanol vehicle is also vital. You cannot afford to wait till somebody wakes up or checks their mobile phone. These claims move incredibly quickly and can have an international scope before you know it. So our ethanol vehicle is actually based in Canada. They have the capability to answer calls in 200 languages, 24/7. Vital, because you can imagine, take that talk incident I keep referring to, the adjuster who was called or the lawyer was out or asleep. 6 hours, it became headline news. So you cannot afford to delay. But hopefully I've also described the important role of the incident manager and the pivotal position that they sit within the process. Okay, so to conclude, for my part, all of the above can be greatly enhanced through time well spent, not only managing these risks, but also in mapping and planning how you would respond to an incident. Again, this is another topic in itself, but this is why we as loss adjusters wholly support the existence of viable business continuity plans that both exist locally and as appropriate across the global operation. From a claims handling perspective, this should at a minimum include a named or nominated loss adjuster and or other suppliers. And the reason for this is simple. We will have all been involved in scenario planning to some degree, but how many of us, particularly amongst our insured entities, have had to physically manage a large or catastrophic brand-threatening event or loss? The answer is surprisingly few. But the loss adjuster and related experts will have a vast portfolio of similar claims to draw upon and impart on the stricken organisation or operation or organisation as a whole. This experience and expertise can be called upon both during peacetime, in the ideal world, or in the strained environment after a loss event. So what are some of the key messages? Well, firstly, get to know and understand your business risks. Absolutely vital. It probably teaches a lot of people to suck eggs, but that is the first question, absolutely. Understand the insurance programme, and through that gain a clear understanding of who carries the risk, what data will be needed by way of sharing information and knowledge, and do you need to put in place any non-disclosure agreements? Again, this can create a real barrier to progress, and we come across it time and time again when we're dealing with cyber-related losses. There is obviously a lot of quite sensitive information that is being transferred when dealing with an event. And internal legal departments of insureds can basically put a block on the passage of that information between the key stakeholders. And it can take hours, if not days, to resolve. And you can, again, imagine the impact that may have on how we effectively manage an insurance, an event. So, again, addressing that up front, having your named parties, identifying the loss adjusters or other experts before the event, getting those NDAs in place has great benefits. Avoid any unknown gaps in coverage, insurance coverage, particularly during this early adopter or development phase. So scenario plan involving a breach coach to assist in these exercises. Again, it's practical, we can apply it, and you can identify where those gaps may be. Identify key stakeholders, both internal and external to the organisation. Import the experience of individuals who can manage the event or breach in the midst of a crisis and have the skills to coordinate the response to target resources. Try not to reinvent the wheel. Utilise on existing business continuity plans, but feed in the adjuster's experience, knowledge and requirements. Have an agreed plan or strategy which has sufficient flexibility and can adapt to hourly or daily changes as information is made available and or regulatory requirements or variations become known. That again is vital. When we're dealing with these type of events, they move very quickly. New information becomes available, which can actually send you in entirely different directions. New risks come to the fore. All of that is being managed within that 48-hour graph that I showed you. So, absolutely have your plan, but it's a template, and you need to be flexible. And as I said, be prepared to consider a different approach. Every event is different, and will have individual drivers important to the business. Predetermine who the parties are to be involved in a major loss, and consider pre-booking capacity if appropriate. Identify a clear chain of command, and encourage communication, and focus on that first 48 hours to 72 hours. Communication is key during this during this period. But importantly, what we need to do is make sure that the experts are doing their thing, and then that we are strategically managing that approach. You want an IT specialist to get on and deal with it. You don't want them to have to try and manage other aspects such as legal, etc. And finally, my final point before we hand over to questions is ensure that you can hit the road running. Make sure, as we've said, that this remains a well-managed event and not an unnecessary headline. So, thank you. Hopefully that's given you a sort of bit of a walkthrough as to cyber risks generally. And I suppose our approach to the management of those from a loss adjusting perspective. Happy to open the floor to any questions you may have. And Doug's obviously.
A very simple question to start off with. Could you explain to me your slide, what does a typical insurance policy cover? You've got, and it's very hard for me to read it, they're so small here. PCI DSS payments, what the difference is that?
Yeah, no, it's not. That's a payment card indemnity type protection. So when a business takes payment via credit cards or has the ability to deal with credit card type payments, then there are a set of rules and requirements that the provider will import on that business around how they protect the data that they may have of customers. So in other words, if you were retaining an individual's credit card details on your systems and then that gets breached, then the provider of those services can import a series of potential fines or requirements on you in relation to that.
So what does DSS stand for?
Oh God, now you're asking.
Social Security.
No, it is. No, I've forgotten exactly what it is, but it is related to that.
Data security standards.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Last question, James.
Yep.
Just with an SME slant, so I, for example, typically outsource their IT to an expert, and something goes wrong, so they get hacked. And what are the contractual agreements and the efficacy between me giving my IT management to an expert and the claim happening? And I suppose leading on to that, sort of the rights of recourse against someone getting something wrong, stroke recovery from the policy.
Okay, so if I just break that down so I understand it, are you talking about the fact that you've outsourced an element of your information security system to somebody else?
Yeah, so I've outsourced my, virus management or something that to someone else. Something goes wrong, I have a loss. That's where the policy responds. But then we find out that actually the guy that installed.
So you're looking at subrogation opportunities. Absolutely. So fundamentally, you are responsible for that data. You own that data. The fact that you've imported somebody else in to provide you with services around that doesn't negate your responsibility for that data. However, one of the things that we are always looking for are potential avenues of subrogation. So much that we do on a property or liability program, if somebody else has been negligent or provided advice or services which are deemed negligent, then there is a potential avenue for recovery. And that is one of the roles of IT forensics. So we would import IT forensics, bring in IT forensics into the proposition, and they would be looking at that cause and extent. And even actually where it becomes more tricky is often you've utilised a IT company to provide you with advice around network security from a consultancy perspective. And then, of course, you then have an event. And you ask yourself, well, hold on a minute, what's going on here? But then the insured may turn around to you and say, well, actually, we've already got a relationship with XYZ. We've asked them to look at this. And there's a massive conflict sitting there. So we then bring in IT forensics to oversee, validate, explore exactly what's gone on. Obviously, sometimes subrogation is contract barred. that's part and parcel of the investigation. But we would certainly look at pursuing any avenue of potential subrogation against a negligent third party.
So typically what I've seen recently is phone systems getting hacked.
Yep.
And this could be the smaller firms where overnight they seem to get diverted to a premium rate note, or something happens where they basically have a financial loss because of that. And I think what I've heard is that the phone company who is responsible seems to, not us mates type conversation, but you owe us £30,000 because you've clocked up.
Yeah. And I probably can't comment on those specific without knowing all the contractual terms. Yeah. And I think it comes down to contractual terms and conditions at the end of the day, and their contractual responsibility against with their customers. And that's very different. Provision of services under the terms of a contract is very different to the loss of data. The loss of data, you are absolutely bound to rights. You can't contract your way out of that. But provision of services and potential consequential losses on the back of that, you may well be able to affect your terms to limit your liabilities. I'm going to let Doug answer. Doug's going to answer this one.
You've done so well. A couple of questions around the SME offering that you mentioned there.
Yeah.
Firstly, what kind of limits are you looking at within in the SME space? Secondly, how long have you been going in that area? You mentioned that you had a process-driven model that you put in place that can then also call upon the greater capabilities if necessary. And the third question on there is what is the global reach that you currently have within the SME space?
Perfect for you, Doug.
Yeah. So, yes, we started with our large risk managed companies, which we launched last year, and we launched an SME UK solution earlier this year. SME is different in that you have different economics of scale. It needs to be a lower cost solution, and therefore, whereas for a large risk managed company, you fly people in, that doesn't work in an SME. It's got to be local providers. Therefore, from a model perspective, it's more complex. You have to build individual solutions in each of the territories in which we operate. So we built it in the UK. We've launched it in the UK. We are in the process of doing it in Australia. Other side of the world, that's just coincidental. So we have, if you like, we have the IP around the model that we need to put in place, which is a 24/7 notification of incident. It then goes to a desktop triage centre. We then bring in a range of specialists, and we bring in our own specialists as appropriate. The challenge that we have is not our own specialists. It's finding those third-party specialists in all of the various jurisdictions. Typically, actually, the IT forensics. So we are in the process of doing that. We'll launch it in the Netherlands in the next few months. That will give us a Benelux or mid to northern European capability. Then we'll probably go down into Spain. We've got some expertise down there. And ironically, I can see it in Latin America as well. I was in the US 2 weeks ago, and we talked to some partners there. So difficult to think about timescales. That might go quickly, it might go a little bit more slowly, but US is of interest to us. How many questions is that?
How do you define SME? What would you regard as SME? And also, I'm assuming that there is a native language capability in the territories that you're looking to be represented there.
That's exactly. It's got to be. That's another reason why it's got to be that localised solution. What do I class as SME? Typically below £50 million or equivalent.
Difficult with defining SME, isn't it, Doug? Because different companies define it differently.
And I think really importantly, and we are doing this, big companies have small losses, small companies have big losses, and therefore, what fortunate. We've done it the right way around. We built the big solution. So if we get a small company that has a big loss, it's very easy for us to escalate that out.
Yeah, I think, as you said, the SME market, and people look at SME businesses and define it, some based upon the number of employees, some based upon turnover, and that then differs depending on which territory you're dealing with. The other thing which is very relevant to the SME market is that sometimes those customers are actually looking for advice as well as solutions. And so our SME model also builds in that advice option, if you like, which is an additional service to those type of clients.
Annie Perry from Temporary Executives. What kind of due diligence do you do on your SMEs, bearing in mind that you want to give them a policy with the appropriate premium on there? Because what I'm thinking is, does the level of maturity that they've got within themselves as an organisation count towards how you will regard them in terms of how you price policies?
Yeah, so I suppose we ought to just clarify, from our point of view, we're obviously not the insurer, so we're not undertaking the due diligence on the SME itself. We go through a huge amount of due diligence in relation to the contractors that we bring to the party, so that we guarantee the services that they provide under our umbrella. But that's the service response. I think one of the things that one of the things I'm seeing, interestingly, and it's a challenge, if you like, to the market. I was with a corporate the other week who were making decisions around the coverage that they may or may not take out in relation to cyber risks. And this is a very large entity. I would argue that this is a type of entity that most insurers would like to have. And they said, well, actually, we're struggling to provide all of the answers to the carrier that they need in order for them to consider whether they will provide us with cyber risk coverage. So therefore, in view of the fact this has got to be in before X date, we will probably self-insure. Now, I think that's a really concerning comment. If we are making it so difficult for our clients to come to us to take out cover, then I think we need to look quite closely at what we're doing. That said, the risks are huge, and we need to understand and manage those risks and be sensible about what we ask. And a good example of that is actually when you're looking at suppliers. As service providers, our customers frequently come to us and say, what is your information security? What have you got in place around the protection of the data that you've got? Is everybody asking that? And these are the sort of things, that unknown risk, we can manage the risk of the insured entity quite carefully. But the big thing about cyber is it splits into others. So the due diligence focus, I think, should be about how they manage some of their own service providers, as well as how they manage their own systems.
Sorry, can I just add to that? You just touched on something really interesting about the due diligence, I think, which is the fact that in a number of industries it's very difficult to get the right kind of insurance that would be relevant and of value to the company.
Yeah.
We do risk audits, and we have a company at FTSE 100 now. It used to be FTSE 250, and they don't take out insurance. Going back to your point, because they say that the level of maturity that they've got within their organisation is something that the insurance market doesn't understand very well at all and can't cover against because they don't have that level of sophistication. Do you think that's a fair comment? Because they don't take out any cyber insurance?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the level of sophistication because it varies dramatically. And actually, it varies dramatically across the world around different levels of maturity around cyber risk. But I just think it's an interesting area, and I think protecting yourself against losses or risk is important. Capacity is a big issue, but at the same time, if we're looking to grow cyber within the market, then we need to make it possible for businesses to do business with us.
I mean, how many businesses today in the UK have cyber insurance? Probably less than 10% by number. Even in the US, where it's been around for just under 10 years now, 50%. So there's a bigger number of uninsured than there are insured. That's an opportunity for us all to go at.
I don't know if any of the insurers would like to make comment.
25% of the US and 5% in Europe at the moment.
Yeah.
You've got the laws in the US which are far more stringent. It's surprising that the number is so low in the US.
Interesting.
We're seeing a lot of litigation now because they're trying to establish precedent and like that because the policies just aren't complementing what is going to results. So that's interesting too as a trend.
Just a quick question, focusing on the loss adjusting aspect and how it affects our client base, particularly an SME client base, how do you actually handle an extortion type claim? For example, you've got an SME who runs their business off a laptop in the cloud and they get crypto locked.
Yeah.
Will you pay £25,000 to unlock it? Can you give us a feel for how you deal with
I mean,
coverage?
it's interesting because, as I said, it's crypto locking is a great example of, and I've seen it time and time again, where you pay over £25,000 in bitcoins, and literally you get an email half an hour later saying thanks, I'll have a bit more please, and no you can't. The way that you deal with crypto lock type claims actually is around how you manage it internally. So the vital thing to have for an organisation is a backup, a good backup of their service, of their estate. But actually, interestingly, a separated backup. An awful lot of operations have a backup, but actually it's linked to the existing, to the main estate. So basically it goes, and it actually affects the backup as well. The way that claims are dealt with, crypto lock type claims, is that you contain it, you import, you basically import better firewalls and systems to basically prevent it from happening again, and you basically then reboot your system with the backup and the new security that you've got in place. But you do not advocate that you pay £25,000.
So you wouldn't pay an extortion claim?
That's not my gift. But I would, the market, the best practice in how to deal with it is as I've just described. There are instances whereby extortion claims, are paid on the back of the actions that were taken. But each individual claim is investigated on its own merits, basically.
Any more questions?
Just one observation on that at the end. We hear that most of this is underreported, and insurers are floundering in the dark trying to find the answer. Are you not also floundering in the dark because most of it's underreported?
It's provocative. I think the issues for us are different in that we are responding to the event. So what we're trying to do is bring specialist partners in. Interestingly, take the IT forensics companies. They are very busy. You look at what they do. They work in a preventative environment as well as responding to breaches. We use the right experts that are needed for the events that we deal with. So no, we don't get affected by that reporting issue. It'll be very interesting. I don't want to go into the subject now. Very interesting to see what if any, the effect of the impending legislation is going to be.
Right, I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you very much to Paul and Doug for coming and giving us such an interesting presentation. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our speakers.